Somehow you have the audacity to have an opinion about everything. About what other people should be doing with their career, about which decisions were mistakes in your lives and which risks weren't worth taking, which path you followed which was too dangerous or too uncertain or too exposed to the possibility of failure. You have your own fully formed view upon all of it, delivered with some sort of quiet confidence of someone who has never had to actually find out whether or not they were right. This is the exact specific cowardice Nassim Taleb spent his entire career trying to name. What he called it was no skin in the game. Taleb's entire argument was simple yet somehow so devastating. A person who bears no personal cost for being wrong has no real position in the game. They have an opinion per se, but the opinions are cheap. They require absolutely nothing and can be spent with no expenditure. They can be held infinitely without any sort of consequence and revised without any sort of admission and abandoned without losing anything. A position, however, is something completely different to Taleb. A position is something that you have to put yourself behind. You have to back up with your own personal self. Something that you have staked something real on, some value or some sort of relationship or anything genuine, you have to stake upon that position. Time, money, reputation, or simply just the version of yourself that exists if this does not work, if it ends up not succeeding. A position can be wrong in a way that costs only you or everyone around you, and that cost itself is not a flaw in the arrangement, but instead is the entire point. Because the person with the skin in the game thinks completely differently to this person with the opinion. They cannot afford the luxury of untested certainty. They actually have to, genuinely have to reckon with whether or not they are right, and not in an abstract or comfortable sense in the assessment of their current position, but instead in the reality that will either confirm or destroy everything they believed in and have assessed. Most people are living entirely in that abstract sense, and what caution actually is, stripped of the virtue it's been dressed in, is the decision that the cost of being wrong is higher than the cost of never finding out, and most people fear that decision, or they rely on that caution. It is the genuine calculation, which is generally unconscious and generally never examined, that safety is worth more than the version of yourself that only exists on the other side of the risk. And somewhere along the way, sometimes that calculation is correct. Not every single risk is worth taking, of course not. Not every single leap will land somewhere worth landing. But the person who has never taken a risk that has genuinely frightened them in their life has not been making careful considerations or calculations. What they've been doing is avoiding the calculation entirely. They've been postponing the moment of reckoning indefinitely and living inside a permanent rehearsal for a life they have not yet committed to actually living in. Taleb would say that that person has outsourced their entire existence to circumstances, that they are waiting for the world to make the decisions for them rather than making the decisions themselves. And the world, left to its own devices, produces the median outcome. It will always produce the average life, the life that you yourself should not want to live in. The thing that happens to everyone who never did anything to make anything specific happen to them is that they end up living the same life as the person who did the exact same thing. It's really self-explanatory, right? The risks worth taking are not the reckless ones. This is the big misreading that lets people off the hook on this idea. Taleb was not arguing for recklessness, but instead was arguing for asymmetry. The intelligent risk is the one where the downside is survivable and the upside is completely transformational. Where the worst case, maybe it'll leave you intact, or maybe, on your knees, at the mercy of life, but the best case will leave you somewhere where you could not have reached by staying still. You would have reached something completely monumental if it worked out. And most people will never take the risks because survivable downsides still feel like a loss to them. The possibility of embarrassment or of failure or of being publicly wrong or humiliated, to them, that registers as a catastrophic threat to their self-image that has never actually been stress tested. Now, Soren Kierkegaard understood this too. I've spoke about him in a lot of my videos and about his leap. But the leap he described was not a blind leap. Yes, it was into a void of uncertainty, but instead it was a deliberate movement into the uncertainty, because certainty in the things that genuinely matter are structurally unavailable to people. The person waiting for the certainty before they commit to absolutely anything is not being prudent or safe. They are simply failing to exist in the only sense that counts in this absurd life of ours. You yourself should and do already know which risk you have been avoiding this whole time. Not in any abstract sense, yet again, specifically, the thing that you have been calling not the right time, or delegating to when you're ready for it, or when you're still figuring it out, or once you've finally understood it. The version of your life that requires you to put something real on the line, on the plate, and figure out whether or not you are right about yourself. And that thing is still not going to wait for better conditions. It's going to wait for you, but it's not going to wait for a better condition to arrive or for you to be ready. It's going to move on once you don't arrive to it finally. All it is waiting for is for you to stop mistaking caution for wisdom or for virtue. Taleb's entire question is not whether or not the risk is worth taking, but instead whether you have any skin in the game at all. Like, that's it, end of conversation. Whether or not you are engaged in the game or if you're not. And if the honest answer is no, which a lot of people will answer that no if they tell themselves truthfully, then you do not have a life worth living right now. You have a very detailed plan for a life worth living.